We have now joining us Giorgio Cafiero, CEO and founder of Gulf State Analytics. Giorgio, good morning and thank you for joining us today. First and foremost, we're just trying to piece everything together and figure out what we can expect in the coming days. Give us some insight in terms of what you think is going to happen next.
Thank you. Good to be on your network. Obviously, the situation is one very, very high stakes. The potential for dangerous escalation is there, and there is a real risk of this spiraling into a much wider regional or global conflict. And I think one thing we need to understand is that Israel was motivated in numerous ways. One of Israel's key objectives here was to completely sabotage the American-Iranian nuclear talks. If U.S. Iran diplomacy was going to result in a new nuclear deal, especially one that would allow Iran to enrich, that was an absolutely nightmarish scenario from the Netanyahu government's perspective. I think it's pretty safe to say that the chances of these nuclear talks continuing are basically at zero right now. And I think one of the key questions is obviously at this point, how will Iran respond to the hundreds of strikes that Israel has waged against sites in Tehran and other parts of the country? We obviously don't know. And also another important unknown variable here is to what extent is the Trump administration going to bring the U.S. into this conflict? Trump told Fox News that if Iran retaliates, the U.S. will come to Israel's defense. What that's going to look like, we'll probably understand a little better in upcoming hours, upcoming days.
Yeah, of course, and there's the meetings happening at 11 a.m. in Washington. So let's see also what the United States will say later today. But I would like to understand, what would it mean to see the U.S. actively involved here?
Well, one scenario we have to consider, and the ambassador was speaking about this on your program a few minutes ago, is that if Iran is going to respond to these attacks by deciding to become a nuclear-armed state, that would obviously fly in the face of Trump's commitment to preventing Iran from becoming a nuclear-armed state. So you might possibly see the United States itself become militarily involved in bombing such nuclear sites inside Iran. Also, we need to consider the possibility of Iran retaliating by firing many missiles and drones against Israel. We saw in April and October of last year, Iran did that. Those attacks were rather choreographed, and Iran showed quite a bit of restraint when waging those attacks. Iran could hit Israel in a much more intense manner now. So how the U.S. would get involved in such a scenario is going to be important. Let's keep in mind, Trump made it clear when he was running for president that he definitely wanted to prevent the U.S. from getting sucked into a new quagmire, a new war in the Middle East. Unfortunately, because of this Israeli aggression against Iran, it might be less likely for him to make good on that campaign promise.
I would also like to understand what this means for the initial conflict that we already had between Israel and Hamas and for the situation in Gaza.
Well, I think another motivation that Israel had for waging this aggression against Iran was to distract the world from the genocide in Gaza. We don't know exactly how this tension, how these hostilities are going to play out, but if there is an all-out war between Israel and Iran, one that spills into other countries in the region, I think fewer people are going to be talking about what's going on in Gaza, and that certainly serves the Netanyahu government's interests.
I would also like to share with our viewers and with you the latest comments from the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in relation to what's going on. So the British Prime Minister saying the reports of Israel-Iran strikes are concerning and urges all parties to step back and reduce tensions urgently. In addition, the British Prime Minister also adding that he's calling for restraint and calm and a return to diplomacy. So, Giorgio, my question to you is, what does this mean from an international perspective? If we think beyond the Middle East, what does this move from Israel mean for the rest of the world?
That's a great question. Since October 2023, when we look at what Israel has been doing in Gaza, many countries throughout the world condemned it. They've expressed moral outrage with it. But at the end of the day, the bloodshed in Gaza was not necessarily a threat to the most fundamental economic interests of major powers around the world, such as China, India, Japan, so on and so forth. But if Israel's aggression against Iran is going to cause a widespread war in the Gulf and throughout the Middle East to erupt, causing the Gulf region to be destabilized, the wider Middle East to be destabilized, that's going to pose a huge threat to the fundamental national interests of these countries. And I think that's going to cause many powerful actors in the international community to respond in ways that are very different from how they responded to Israel's war on Gaza.
I would also like to address the timing here, because this is happening not just days before we were about to witness another round of conversations between the U.S. and Iran, but also at a time when some international institutions were announcing sanctions on Israel as well. So explain to us perhaps how there's a correlation, if there's a correlation here.
Well, as I was saying earlier, on Sunday, the U.S. delegation led by Steve Witkoff and the Iranian delegation were set to meet in the Omani capital for the sixth round of talks. And of course, people were becoming more and more pessimistic about some sort of a breakthrough because of the sticking issue of Iran's right to enrich uranium. But nonetheless, both sides were keen to return to the roundtable for a continuation of talks. And that was disturbing in the eyes of Netanyahu's government. And the Israeli government wanted to ensure that that there would be no diplomatic progress in relation to these the American-Iranian nuclear talks. And like I said, I think Israel is going to succeed in terms of.
Giorgio, excuse me for interrupting, but what I would also like to understand is that, for instance, we saw the UK sanctioning some Israeli members as well. So I would like to understand is how that perhaps played into the Israel move as well.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that that necessarily had any sort of direct impact on the calculation that the Israeli leadership made when it came to carrying out hundreds of strikes against Iran over the past few hours. I see them as sort of unrelated. There is no doubt, though, that in the West, more statesmen are speaking out against Israel. There's some mostly symbolic moves being made, but by and large, the Western countries are not taking real concrete measures against Israel. We'll have to see how these hostilities with Iran play out. But if there is a huge powerful Iranian retaliation, my sense is that probably many countries in Europe will come to Israel's defense and sort of buy into a common Western narrative that Israel is the victim. The fact that Israel waged this aggression against Iran will not change that assessment. Right. I think the UK will be standing close by Israel's side if this escalates.
Well, let's see what the next days will bring. Thank you so much for joining us today. Giorgio Cafiero, CEO and founder of Gulf State Analytics.